One giant pixel arrived at the SCL Stadium with one goal: to turn Reading Football Club into the best team in Europe. How did he get on? Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals, the full story. A new owner, new players and a new manager. Could this be a new beginning for Reading FC? Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals Season 1. The fans look pretty chuffed, don't they? And so they should. They've experienced transfer embargoes, points deductions and relegation over the past few years. But now American tycoon Rob Kuig has bought the club from the much maligned Dai Yonger. And he's brought in a new gaffer to try to take the Royals from League One to the very top. Last season, Reading came within a whisker of making the playoffs, and since then some big players have left for pastures new. Centre-back Tyler Bindon is on loan at Sheffield United from Nottingham Forest, while his defensive partner Amadou Mbenge has gone to QPR. Further forward, midfielder Harvey Nibbs is now plying his trade at Charlton, and striker Jaden Wareham is at Exeter City. But some very talented players have decided to stay at the club. There's the goalkeeper Joel Pereira, who used to be on the books at Manchester United. Then there's the midfield pairing of captain Lewis Wing and Welsh legend Robbie Savage's son Charlie. Forward Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan meanwhile has everything you need to score goals at this level. And let's not forget teenage fullback Andre Garcia, who looks like he's going to be very special indeed. On top of that, a bunch of new players have been brought in either permanently or on loan. Brighton have sent Marco Marni and Kamari Doyle to the SCL Stadium for this season. Manchester City have done the same with Finley Burns, while Matty Jacob is on loan from Hull City. And it's one of the permanent signings that is perhaps the most exciting. Winger Daniel Cherewa has bags of pace and bags of skill. He could easily light up League One. Here's how Reading line up for the new campaign. It may look a little defensive, but don't worry, they've been given plenty of licence to get forward. And finally, let's take a quick peek at the Youth Academy. Well, there might be some diamonds in the rough, but it looks like we'll have to wait a while to unearth them. Here we go then, the opening day of the season and a trip to Sincil Bank to play Lincoln City. Here's a stat for you. The last time Reading won here was all the way back in 1985. Could they break their 40-year hoodoo? The short answer's no. And to be fair, they didn't really deserve to either. The Royals started brightly enough and really should have taken the lead here. I'm still not sure how Ehibhatiomhan managed to mess this up, but you have to say that is a fabulous save. The keeper also kept out this effort from Ben Elliott, but that was as good as it got for the visitors. Lincoln dominated the rest of the game, and only a series of fine saves from Pereira kept it goalless. The Thames Valley derby against Wycombe Wanderers. A chance to earn not only 3 precious points, but also local bragging rights. New signing Paddy Lane was the star of the show in this one. The Northern Ireland international broke the deadlock after latching onto an Omani pass. And just look at those scenes back in Reading. I can only think that's the Purple Turtle Bar. Look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. Lane thought he had a second just before half-time, but he was flagged for offside. Let's take a look at the replay. Ooh, that's a close one. Ehibhatiomhan had the chance to redeem himself after that miss against Lincoln, but alas, this effort was saved. It made no difference in the end, as Wycombe never looked like scoring. This corner and then this cross right at the end of the match summed up their travails in front of goal. Final score 1-0. Having seen off Barnsley in the first round of the competition, Reading travelled to Championship side Stoke City in round 2 of the Carabao Cup. It was a chance for the reserves to strut their stuff, and it's fair to say they made the most of their opportunity. Now, did you know that Reading's young striker Basil Tuma used to be the deputy head boy at Eton of all places? It's true, look it up if you want, but not before admiring this awesome turn and finish to give the visitors the lead at the Bet365. Now from the sublime to the ridiculous, some appalling defending here to allow Tatsuki Siko to get to the byline and pull it back for Lamina Cisse to fire home the equaliser. Looking at the replay, it seems that shot was heading wide before it hit Royals defender Michael Stickland. Dreadful stuff all round. Luckily, the old Etonian was playing a blinder and soon had his second. He didn't have to work quite so hard for this one, as Brighton loanee Kamari Doyle put it on an absolute plate for him. Now, Carabao Cup ties can be pretty soporific, but the second half here was positively pulsating. Tuma almost turned provider for Mamadi Kamara, before Seco somehow conspired to spurn this glorious chance at the other end. Kamara then thought he had made the game safe, but the linesman put their flag up for offside. Fair enough. And then with just seconds remaining, Pereira pulled off a quite unbelievable save to deny former Royal Lewis Baker and seal Reading's place in the next round of the competition. And just take a look at who awaited them. Premier League champions Liverpool at a sold-out SCL stadium. Reading fans may have been hoping that their opponents would not be taking the competition seriously and would be putting out their reserves, but one look at that starting lineup showed that the Reds were here to win. Still, the hosts more than held their own in the opening half hour until one moment changed the entire complexion of the match. Carabao was played through and could have squared it to Omani, but he decided to go for glory himself. Not 5 minutes later, Alexander Isak was played through and beat not one but two defenders before sending a thumping finish into the net. After that, it was a procession. Wonder kid Rio Nguoma soon added a second before fellow youngster Seven Bajcetic netted just after half-time. You just knew that Mohamed Salah was going to get on the score sheet at some point, and then, having opened the scoring, Isak finished things off in injury time. This was a sobering result for the Royals, who would have to pick themselves up, dust themselves off and concentrate on the league for a bit. But they were soon hit with more bad news. Financial problems meant that their transfer kitty had to be slashed by £500,000. All of this was hardly the ideal preparation for a home game against table-topping Luton Town, who had the league's top scorer Elijah Adebayo up front. But with Christmas fast approaching, Reading's players wanted to give their fans an early present, and they more than played their part in what turned out to be the game of the season so far. Ben Elliott got the ball rolling with a run that saw defenders flock to him like moths to a flame. You could have driven a train through the gap they left behind. Captain Lewis Wing accepted Elliott's pass and slammed the ball home. But with half-time fast approaching, the Royals made exactly the same mistake at the back. They were so worried about Adebayo that they did not spot Jordan Clark's run, and by the time they did, it was too late. As the match wore on, it looked like neither side would be able to break the deadlock, but that all changed with the introduction of Kamari Doyle. The substitute flashed a shot against the post on 77 minutes before getting on the end of Ehibhatiomhan's flick just 4 minutes later. That was not the end of the drama, however. With 5 minutes remaining, Adebayo showed why he is at the top of the League One scoring charts with a fine finish to spark wild celebrations and seemingly rescue a point for the visitors. But for some reason, the referee did not blow their whistle when the allotted 3 minutes of injury time was up. And then this happened. The SCL went ballistic. What a way for the Royals to bounce back from a terrible few weeks. With half the season gone then, Reading were firmly ensconced in an automatic promotion spot with league leaders Luton in their sights. When the January transfer window opened, Reading decided against splashing the cash on new signings. Instead, midfielder Tivonga Rashisha was allowed to join FC Andorra for £450,000. Brighton and Hull then decided to recall Marco Mani and Matty Jacob as they were not being given enough playing time. This meant that the Royal squad was not looking quite as bloated as it had been as they turned their attention to the world's oldest football competition, the FA Cup. And having already taken care of Cheltenham Town and Wigan Athletic in rounds 2 and 3, the Royals travelled to Ashton Gate to face Championship side Bristol City in the 4th round. Playing 3 at the back always looked like a big risk against Reading's front 3, and so it proved. The hosts were given an early warning of what was to come as Elliott found Paddy Lane and he forced the goalkeeper into a good save. But they were not to be denied, and Elliott was the architect again, popping a pass to Ehibhatiomhan, who produced a classy finish. The roles were then reversed as Ehibhatiomhan waited for Elliott to make a lung-bursting run forward before slipping the ball into his path. And the finish was exquisite. Hold on, let's take a look at that replay. I'm not sure legs are meant to do that. Bristol City could not handle Reading's attackers, and the game was all but over as a contest before half-time. You know the drill by now. Elliott into Ehibhatiomhan, ball into net. Far too easy. With Omani gone, the goal-scoring burden had fallen squarely on this young man's shoulders, and he was showing that he was firmly up to the challenge here at Ashton Gate. Somewhat unsurprisingly, the visitors couldn't maintain those high levels after the break, and the hosts grew grew into the game somewhat. They eventually got themselves on the score sheet late on as Anis Mehmeti held off Jeriel Dorset and found the far corner. The goal really sparked them into life and they went close twice more in added time, but Pereira was there to save his side on both occasions. This deserved victory gave Reading a home tie against Premier League side Brentford in the next round. The visitors lined up with Kai Havertz in their ranks, with the former Arsenal forward having moved across London during the January transfer window. Onto the game itself, Reading started well and stood firm against their more illustrious opponents. But while they had been able to cut through Bristol City almost at will, Brentford were a different proposition entirely. Every time they broke forward, they found that their attacks were being snuffed out with relative ease. At the other end, Brentford began ramping up the pressure on their opponents. Jordan Henderson and Mikkel Damsgaard were both denied by Pereira before Havertz had a shot blocked and saw another effort fly wildly off target. The German persevered and with seconds remaining threaded a wonderful pass into the path of Kevin Schade, and he did the rest. Heartbreak for Reading's players and their fans then, but this wasn't the end of their cup exploits, not by a long way. Having paid no attention to the competition whatsoever, they found themselves in the semi-finals of the Virtu Trophy. With a trip to Wembley up for grabs, they faced League 2 Walsall, who looked like they were going to try to keep it tight by playing 5 at the back at the SCL Stadium. But the best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, look it up, and after just 4 minutes, Elliott got onto the end of an Ehibhatiomhan pass to put the Royals ahead. Walsall looked shell-shocked as Reading poured forward, with Wing forcing their goalkeeper into a good save and Dorset heading wide. But the visitors gathered themselves and twice went close to forcing an equaliser as Jamie Jellis brought the best out of Pereira before Aaron Presley poked a shot beyond the far post under pressure from Garcia. The second half was much less frantic, with both sides probing for an opening. But the match burst into life late on as 2 substitutes, Doyle and Shea Spencer, combined to set up Chirewa for what looked like Reading's second. To his chagrin, he was offside. Then, with moments remaining, Chirewa found Ehibhatiomhan and he squared it for Doyle to lift the roof off the SCL. The Royals were on their way back to Wembley. Reading have been to the National Stadium on a number of occasions, but haven't actually won there since lifting the now defunct Simod Cup back in 1988. While fellow League One outfit Wigan Athletic wouldn't be easy opponents, this felt like a real chance to win some silverware at this famous venue. Now, some would argue that there is no place for sentimentality in football, but one giant pixel obviously disagreed as he picked Royal stalwart Andy Yeardom as captain in what looked like being his final season with the club. There was nothing sentimental about the ruthless way in which Reading went about their business at Wembley, however. Straight from kick-off they worked the ball upfield and it eventually made its way to the feet of the prolific Ehibhatiomhan, who found the bottom corner. Once again, the purple turtle was bouncing. Wigan then wasted a couple of golden opportunities to get back on level terms as Paul Mullin drew a fingertip save from Pereira and Christian Sadie fired wide from the edge of the box. And the Royals punished them for their profligacy, with Ehibhatiomhan finishing off a flowing move to make it 2-0. Pereira was once again called upon to save his side as he shuffled Joseph Hungbo's effort around the post. From the resulting corner, Reading broke at pace. Chirewa played it into Ehibhatiomhan, who waited and waited before releasing Elliott. And the former Chelsea youngster made no mistake. Sucker punch after sucker punch after sucker punch, and you can possibly forgive Wigan for falling apart at that point, but they kept on plugging away, creating a number of chances but just failing to take them. Finally, with time running out, their pressure paid off. Callum Wright latched onto a pass from Sadie and gleefully rammed it into the top corner to reduce the deficit. Then in added time, Sadie was at it again as his pass allowed Paul Mullin to pull another goal back. But it was too little, too late. The Virtu Trophy may not be the most glamorous of competitions, but Reading's players and fans didn't care one bit. And what a moment for Yeardom, who lifted the trophy to get the party started. This was a welcome piece of silverware, but the Royals still had a job to do in League One, and one of their toughest games in the run-in came against fellow high flyers Cardiff City. In the pouring rain at the SCL, this was a veritable game of two halves. Reading started like a train, and yet again it was Elliott pulling pulling the strings and Ehibhatiomhan applying the finishing touch as the hosts went ahead. With the crowd urging them on, the Royals kept coming forward and only the Cardiff goalkeeper kept his side in it with saves from Ehibhatiomhan and Chirewa. Lord knows what the visitors' manager said at half-time, because they came out for the second half like men possessed. Within minutes of the restart, Chris Willock found Alex Robertson and he blew past Finley Burns before firing past Pereira. Reading were wobbling and mistakes at the back almost gave Callum Robinson the chance to win it. But Dorset appeared from nowhere to produce an astonishing tackle and ensure that the match ended 1-1. After all of that, this was the situation with 2 games of the season remaining. Reading were outside the automatic promotion spots, but crucially, Cardiff had already completed their League One campaign. The Royals knew that if they beat Mansfield Town in their next game, they would secure promotion to the Championship. And with a match against Luton at Kenilworth Road on the final day, that would also set up a mouth-watering winner-takes-all clash for the title. Field Mill was looking resplendent as the two sides emerged into the May sunshine. Unsurprisingly, Reading appeared to be quite anxious early on, and the hosts were the better side in the opening stages. Luckily, the Royals had Pereira between the sticks, and he did well to tip this George Maris effort around the post early on. Slowly but surely, the visitors worked up ahead of steam, and as on so many other occasions this season, Elliott and Ehibhatiomhan combined to put them 1 up. This pairing had built up quite the partnership, and they were at it again just 8 minutes later to really settle any lingering nerves. The floodgates well and truly opened in the second half as Paddy Lane finished off yet another pass from the increasingly influential Elliott. Substitutes Jack Marriott and Kamari Doyle then combined to allow the former to lash a shot into the bottom corner, and there was still time for the captain to stride through a tiring Mansfield backline to add a 5th and really put the icing on the cake. As the final whistle blew, Reading had ensured that they would be a Championship club once more after 3 seasons away. They let those waves of relief and elation wash over them as they accepted the adulation of the travelling fans. But they could not switch off completely, because that final game against Luton Town was on the horizon. The Hatters' superior goal difference meant that a draw would not be enough for Reading to win the title, only a win would do. But the destination of the League One trophy was not the only topic of conversation in the build-up to this one. There was also a debate as to whether Elijah Adebayo or Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan would fire their side to glory. What a chance this was for Adebayo to strike the first blow in that particular contest, but somehow Pereira got a hand to it to keep out his shot from 6 yards. Soon afterwards, Reading went through the gears, putting together a flowing move that ended with Ehibhatiomhan taking advantage of some truly woeful goalkeeping to put his side ahead. Honestly, what on earth was the keeper doing there? The Hatters responded well to going behind, with Milanik Ali twice going close before Mads Andersen headed over. But the Royals were always a threat, and Elliott almost doubled their advantage before half-time. Then, with an hour gone, the visitors struck what felt like a decisive blow as Charlie Savage found Daniel Chirewa and he sent a looping effort into the far corner. The Royals' backline had successfully nullified the threat of Adebayo thus far, and even when they made a mistake, he could not find a way past Pereira. With seconds remaining, Ehibhatiomhan showed him how it was done to not only win the Battle of the Strikers, but to also cement Reading's status as champions. Substitutes streamed onto the pitch as the final whistle blew. After 10 gruelling months, the Royals had come out on top in League One. All that was left was for Captain Lewis Wing to accept the trophy, and for he and his colleagues to accept the plaudits from the boisterous travelling support. The Championship would almost certainly prove tougher, but that could wait. This was a time for celebration. Joel Pereira was named the League One Player of the Season for his sterling efforts between the sticks. Just look at how many clean sheets he ended up with. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan was the league's 4th highest goal scorer, while Ben Elliott and Daniel Chirewa were both in the top 3 when it came to assists. So there you have it. Reading will be plying their trade in the Championship next season after winning the League One title and also taking home the Virtu Trophy. League One completed it, mate. That's right, Reading Football Club are back in the Championship after 3 years away. But the big question is whether they can survive or maybe even thrive at this level. Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals Season 2. The 2025-26 season was an incredibly successful one for Reading as they secured the League One title on the final day and also won the Virtu Trophy at Wembley. Now it was time for Royals boss One Giant Pixel to put those celebrations to to the back of his mind and concentrate on preparing for life back in the second tier of English football. Without doing anything, his squad was already a little bit smaller than before. After 8 seasons at the club, Andy Yeardom had left at the end of his contract, as had young wingers Jeremiah Okeen-Peters and Emmanuel Osho. Centre-back Finley Burns and midfielder Kamari Doyle had returned to Manchester City and Brighton respectively as their loans had finished. And so as the summer transfer window opened, this was how the Royals squad looked. The gaffer wanted to give most of these guys the chance to prove themselves in the Championship, but that didn't mean there wouldn't be a few changes at the SCL Stadium. With almost £7 million burning a hole in his pocket, his first target was a centre-back to replace Finley Burns. The rangy Hayden Matthews looked like the perfect fit. He became the manager's first signing as he arrived from Portsmouth, who had just been relegated to League One for £950,000. Reading goalkeeper Joel Pereira was a sensation during the club's charge to the League One title, winning the competition's Player of the Year award and coming top of the clean sheet table. His understudy Jack Stevens hadn't had much of a look in, and when St Louis City FC came calling with a £470,000 bid, the Royals reluctantly let him go. One Giant Pixel immediately moved for a new substitute goalie in the form of Pierce Charles. He came in from Sheffield Wednesday, who had also just been relegated to League One for just shy of £2 million. Then disaster. A banking issue temporarily wiped £1.8 million off Reading's transfer kitty, but the boss did not let that stop him from more wheeling and dealing. Defensive midfielder Liam Fraser was sold to FCSB, formerly known as Steaua Bucharest, for $730,000. And young fullback John Ryan also went to Romania, joining FC Metaloglobus for $400,000. Of that money, just under £1 million was spent on Bradley Ibrahim, a defensive midfielder from Plymouth Argyle. After Ibrahim's arrival came the welcome news that the banking issue had been resolved, and Reading decided to splash yet more cash straight away. They raided League Two outfit Accrington Stanley, picking up Swedish winger Isak Brusberg for just under £1 million. And the Royals' final deal of the summer saw striker Jack Marriott head to Austria as he joined Wolfsberger AC for £900,000. The new season was just around the corner, and despite those comings and goings, Reading's starting lineup hadn't actually changed all that much. In fact, Hayden Matthews was the only new signing to go straight into the first 11. The rest would have to watch on from the bench for now. Now, would any members of the club's youth academy be making the step up anytime soon? There were definitely a few players with the potential to do so, but not quite yet. The first game of the new season saw Reading welcome 2013 League Cup winners Swansea City to the SCL Stadium, and any fears that the Royals would struggle in the Championship were soon dispelled as they tore into their opponents. Unsurprisingly, it was last season's top scorer Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan who got them up and running after a flowing move. Reading were flying, and the forwards saw another couple of chances go begging either side of half-time as the visitors wilted. Then, on his debut, Bradley Ibrahim galloped through the middle and played a perfect pass into the path of Ehibhatiomhan, who netted with ease. Swansea finally woke up late on, but they could not find a way past Pereira, who picked up his first clean sheet of the season. It would not be his last. Now, it may not be the most glamorous of local derbies, but this was a match that Royals fans have been waiting for since the fixture list was released. And they were soon celebrating as Daniel Treray was sped away down the left before cutting inside and giving Paddy Lane an easy tap-in. Brian de Keersmaeker launched a one-man mission to try to haul the visitors level, but he was denied twice by the ever-impressive Pereira. The second half was all about the battle between Reading midfielder Charlie Savage and Oxford United goalkeeper Jamie Cumming. The former was denied by the latter on no fewer than 3 separate occasions, but thankfully the hosts were not made to rue those missed chances as they ran out 1-0 winners. Having already seen off Mansfield Town and Bristol City, Reading were rewarded with a trip to face Premier League side Nottingham Forest in round 3 of the Carabao Cup. Yes, Ange Postecoglou was still there and looking to win a trophy in what was his second season with the club. And his side started well, dominating the first half without ever really creating a clear goal-scoring opportunity. But as we all know, games can change in an instant, and that's exactly what happened here. Reading had been largely toothless in attack, but just after the restart, a lucky bounce fell to Paddy Lane, and he was denied by Alex Ramiro. That seemed to boost the visitors' confidence, and they then put together a patient passing move that ended with Elliott tucking it away to stun the Forest faithful. Reading then showed they could be quick and direct when necessary, as Wing found Brusberg and his pass allowed Ehibhatiomhan to double the Royals' advantage. Game over? Not quite. The hosts went up the other end, and when the ball dropped to Amari Hutchinson on the edge of the box, he used the outside of his boot to send a wonderfully curling effort into the top corner. It was an outstanding finish, but could it spark a late comeback? The answer was no. With time running out, Ibrahim found Chirewa, and he cut the ball back for Tyler Saki to fire into the roof of the net. This was the first time in 3 attempts that One Giant Pixel side had overcome Premier League opposition, and it also ensured that if Big Ange was to win a trophy in his second season, it would not be the Carabao Cup. The Royals went on to defeat West Bromwich Albion in round 4 to set up a quarter-final against Graham Potter's West Ham United at the London Stadium. The first 15 minutes set the tone for this one as the hosts carved out chance after chance, and only some exceptional goalkeeping kept them out. It was therefore no surprise when Nicholas Fulkrug held off a defender and found Mateus Fernandes, who in turn found the far corner of the net to put them ahead. Pereira did manage to get a hand to it, but even he couldn't deny the hammers on this occasion. Reading were being thoroughly outplayed, but they could have dragged themselves back into it before the break. Paddy Lane found himself one-on-one with the keeper, but hit the post when he looked certain to score. The second half largely followed the same pattern as the first, with the hosts dominating and Pereira just about managing to keep his side in it with save after save. But 1-0 is always a dangerous scoreline, and the Royals almost snatched a goal at the death, but Chirewa's effort was turned around the post, and that was that. Reading's Carabao Cup adventure may have been over, but they were absolutely flying in the Championship. Then this happened. Does anyone remember Lasagna Gate, the incident that derailed Tottenham's quest to qualify for the Champions League in 2006? This was basically the same thing and left many of Reading's starting 11 too unwell to face Preston at Deepdale. One Giant Pixel just about managed to cobble a team together, but the big question was how they would cope in the circumstances. Well, in the first half they were all at sea, but fortunately standing goalkeeper Pierce Charles was in fine fettle. And he had to be, as Preston created chances almost at will, with Will Keane, Benjamin Whiteman, Milutin Osmajic and Paul Valentin all testing the young goalie. But the visitors held firm, and then with an hour played, a short corner routine saw Tyler Saki find Ehibhatiomhan, and he hammered a shot into the far corner. Buoyed by this, the Royals then put together a fine passing move that ended with the evergreen Matt Ritchie rolling the ball into the path of Ehibhatiomhan, and he did the rest. The young striker was on fire and completed his hat-trick late on after another great move involving Shea Spencer and Isaac Brusberg. Preston had capitulated at this point, and in added time Ehibhatiomhan turned provider as he picked out the run of Spencer, who finished with aplomb. If any match summed up the togetherness and fighting spirit of this Reading squad, this was it. At the season's halfway point, the Royals were 10 points clear of Leeds United at the top of the table and seemingly strolling to a first Championship title triumph since 2012. Given how well the players were performing, they decided not to make any changes to their squad in the transfer window. And having beaten Leeds in the third round of the FA Cup, they were full of confidence as they travelled to North London to face Thomas Frank's Spurs in round 4. The hosts had just signed Slovenian goalkeeper Jan Oblak from Atletico Madrid, and this was his debut for the club. And he had to be at his very best early on as Ben Elliott worked some space on the edge of the box before firing in a low shot that the keeper tipped wide. Reading were playing with real assurance and conviction and went close again soon afterwards, as Ehibhatiomhan fired just wide under pressure from the onrushing Oblak. But as we all know, you have to take your chances when you're on top, and that was certainly the case here. Mathis Tel showed what Tottenham were capable of as he forced Pereira into a good save just before half-time, and their class eventually told. With fewer than 20 minutes remaining, Mexican winger Alexis Vega produced a delicious cross, and there was Mohamed Kudus to power a header beyond Pereira. The Royals could not respond, and their opponents made the game safe in the final few minutes, as Kudus produced another good finish to send the Spurs fans into raptures. As Reading manager, One Giant Pixel had now come up against Premier League sides on no fewer than 5 occasions, and had lost on 4 of them. That did not bode well if they did go up, but at least their latest cup exit meant they could focus solely on the Championship for the rest of the campaign. The first test of their bounce-back ability came against Southampton in the driving rain at the SCL Stadium, and the visiting Saints threatened to pour cold water on the hosts' promotion push early on. Charlie Savage gave the ball away, and Finn Azaz set off on a run that ended with a shot into the top corner. Just minutes later they were at it again, with the impressive Azaz sending in a low cross that was converted by the on-rushing Damien Downs. Were Reading on their way to another defeat? Not if Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan had anything to do with it. First of all, the young forward set up Elliott, only to see his shot come crashing back off the post. Just 5 minutes later he tried again, and this time Charlie Savage ran through to find the far corner and get the SCL believing again. Then, not long before half-time, Daniel Cherewa went careering down the left-hand side before finding Ehibhatiomhan, who took a touch before equalising with a classy finish. The Royals were well and truly back in business, and they really ramped up the pressure on their opponents in the second half. However, time and again, Southampton goalkeeper Aaron Ramsdale was on hand to deny them. Then, with just seconds remaining, Savage played the ball into Isaac Brusberg and, well, this happened. Cue wild celebrations on the pitch and in the stands as Reading snatched victory in a game they had looked like losing early on. After that, the Royals just kept on winning. Against Coventry at the SCL, Elliott set them on their way to yet another 3 points. Ehibhatiomhan then doubled the hosts' lead with quarter of an hour remaining before Saki ran through to finish things off late on. Against fellow high flyers Brighton, meanwhile, Ehibhatiomhan scored the only goal of the game as they secured yet another vital victory. Now, I would love to say that the promotion race was full of tension and drama, but truth be told, it wasn't. In the end, Reading secured a top 2 finish and a place in the Premier League with 6 games remaining. They celebrated with a trip to North East Wales to face Wrexham, the club owned by actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. And let me tell you, this match featured mistakes that wouldn't look out of place in any film or TV blooper reel. Things started off well enough for the visitors, with Elliott finding Ehibhatiomhan, who finished with ease. Just minutes later, the two of them were at it again as the Royals doubled their lead and seemingly put this contest to bed. But a couple of missed tackles from captain Lewis Wing and centre-back Paudie O'Connor allowed George Thomason to smash the ball past Piers Charles. Then it was Charles' turn to make a hideous mistake as just after half-time, his pass went straight to former Royal striker Sam Smith and he volleyed home the equaliser. The crowd didn't have to wait long for the next major lapse in concentration, but this time it was from one of the Wrexham players. Dominic Hyam tried to play the ball back to the keeper but only succeeded in picking out Paddy Lane, and he was never going to pass up that opportunity. Reading finally made the game safe late on as for the third time in this match, Elliott found Ehibhatiomhan and he produced an emphatic finish to seal his hat-trick. That victory meant the Royals went into their home game against Leeds United knowing that a win would secure the title. Not only that, but it would also take them above the 106 points they accrued when they came top of the Championship back in 2006. Just a few minutes in, and would you believe it, Elliott found Ehibhatiomhan and he produced a thunderous finish to beat Leeds keeper Luca Perry. I would love to know how many times these two have combined for a goal since One Giant Pixel took over. Sean Longstaff and Brendan Aronson did their best to emulate that partnership on 2 occasions, but the latter twice failed to beat Pereira. Then, in first half stoppage time, Ehibhatiomhan waited and waited before picking out Cherewa, and he made it 2-0. If Leeds were going to find a way back into this one, they needed to score next, and they did just that as Longstaff got the assist that his fine display deserved. Noah Okafor's strike gave the visiting fans hope that their team could grab at least a point. But that hope was extinguished as Elliott made a lung-bursting run into space, took Ehibhatiomhan's pass and swept the ball past Perry. Was that the knockout blow? If it wasn't, this certainly was. A quick Reading break in added time saw Ibrahim burst forward and Ehibhatiomhan complete a hat-trick of assists as Brusberg tapped in. This display was a microcosm of the way in which Reading had swept all before them in winning the Championship title. All that was left was for captain Lewis Wing to step forward and lift the Royals' 3rd trophy since One Giant Pixel had become boss. The manager's record against Premier League opposition would undoubtedly be a cause for concern among the Reading faithful, but at that moment they didn't care one bit. There was just one question left to answer. Could Reading beat the record 111 points that Birmingham City achieved in winning League One in 2025? Of course they could. And while the 118 points is the standout stat here, one shouldn't ignore the fact that they only lost twice and conceded just 18 times in 46 games. Having won the League One equivalent the previous year, Joel Pereira was named as the Championship's Player of the Season. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan bagged the Golden Boot with a whopping 33 goals, while Ben Elliott got the 5th highest number of assists. Somehow Elliott was the only Royals player to get into the Championship team of the season. Disgraceful stuff. But it didn't matter really. What did matter was that Reading would be plying their trade in the Premier League next season. We are Premier League, say we are Premier League. That's right, after 14 long seasons, Reading FC are back among the big boys. But can these underdogs defy the odds and avoid the dreaded drop? Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals Season 3. Reading was simply unstoppable in 2026-27. They stormed to the championship title, racking up a record 118 points in the process. But with promotion came uncertainty. Could one giant pixel side make the step up? In 5 games against Premier League opposition since he became manager, they had won just once. And now their squad was smaller than before. Veteran Matt Ritchie had retired and fullback Ashkar Ahmed had left at the end of his contract. Fortunately, the gaffer had a plan, and it involved using his £38 million war chest to raid the championship for youngsters with bags of potential. Towering central defender Joachim Kai Sander arrived from Southampton for £1.4 million, while pacey right-back Elijah Dijkstra joined from Bristol City for £2.5 million. Reading then spent £3.25 million to prize defensive midfielder Jacob Wright away from Norwich City before dropping another £2.75 million on QPR attacking midfielder Kieran Morgan. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan had been Reading's top scorer in League One and the Championship, but Reading's only other striking option was Basil Touma. To provide competition for places up front, the Royals brought in another Southampton player, Jay Robinson, for £2 million. Last but certainly not least was Reading's biggest signing of the summer, Nestori Irankunda, who joined from Watford for a whopping £7.35 million. For a club of Reading's size, this was a massive outlay for one player. It remained to be seen whether the winger could justify it. Irankunda's arrival meant there was no room for Mamadi Kamara, who was allowed to go to Jagiellonia Białystok in Poland for £1.5 million. After all of that, this was Reading's starting 11, but would it be enough? Only time would tell. Apart from the new signings, One Giant Pixel also decided to promote a couple of players from the youth academy before immediately sending them out on loan. Defensive midfielder Jayden Bourne joined Südtirol in Italy for 2 years, while goalkeeper Joseph Jenkins went to Dutch giants Feyenoord for the same amount of time. Elsewhere in the academy, attacking midfielder Joshua Newton looked like he was going to be a sensation in the future, as did right winger Billy Sutton, but they would be staying right where they were for now. Fun fact, Reading have never lost their first match of a Premier League season. David Moyes' Everton arrived at the SCL on the opening day hoping to change all of that. But spoiler alert, they couldn't. Irankunda had a debut to remember as he finished off a flowing move just 20 minutes in before Ehibhatiomhan opened his account for the season not long after that. Tierno Barry's stats at halftime summed up Everton's performance up to that point, and things went from bad to worse after the break. Irankunda bagged his second goal of the afternoon from Savage's low cross, and then another debutant, substitute Jay Robinson, finished things off. Robinson even brought out the Cole Palmer celebration, and just look at David Moyes, absolutely fuming. Now there are some grounds you immediately look forward to visiting when you get promoted to the Premier League, and Old Trafford is certainly one of them. But Reading got off to a nightmare start at the Theatre of Dreams as Brian Mbumo's first time pass was hammered into the top corner by Benjamin Seshko. The Royals refused to let their heads drop, and straight from kickoff, Irankunda fired against the post before Ehibhatiomhan gobbled up the rebound. Irankunda and Daniel Touré were both forced Senny Lomans into fine saves either side of half-time. Then, with less than quarter of an hour remaining, the former gleefully accepted a pass from Ehibhatiomhan, and just look at that for a composed finish. What a result this was, and it must have filled Reading with confidence as they began their Carabao Cup campaign. Having seen off Millwall in the second round, they welcomed Chelsea to the SCL Stadium in round 3. The visitors were always going to provide a stern test, especially with players like Spanish winger Nico Williams in their lineup. And so it proved. Moises Caicedo tapped in the opener after David Fofana's shot had been saved, before Fofana himself curled a beauty into the top corner to make it 2-0 just before half-time. Reading knew they had to score next, and they did just that when Kieran Morgan turned his man inside out and found the bottom corner. But any hope of a miraculous comeback was extinguished in the final few minutes as Keanu Dyer converted Fofana's fiercely struck cross. The Royals would not have wanted to go out of the Carabao Cup at such an early stage, but one silver lining was that they could now concentrate on the league for a while. Reading's home game against Tottenham gave them the chance to show how far they had come since being knocked out of the FA Cup by Spurs the previous season. Welsh midfielder Charlie Savage got the ball rolling with his first goal of the campaign, while Ben Elliott squeezed a shot past Jan Oblak straight after half-time. This dreadful pass from Mathis Tel summed things up from a Tottenham point of view before Irankunda made it 3 with an unstoppable shot. There was still time for substitute Jay Robinson Robinson to get on the end of passes from Morgan and Chirewa to complete a truly miserable afternoon for the Spurs players and their travelling fans. Reading were flying and they continued their fine form against Sunderland at the Stadium of Light. They went ahead through yet another goal from Irankunda, but the hosts hauled themselves level as Tyrick Mitchell fired into the roof of the net just before the break. But then came a goal fit to win any game. It all started when Piers Charles plucked a Kenneth Taylor cross out of the air. The ball was moved up the pitch with pace, purpose and precision. All of a sudden the Royals were bearing down on the Sunderland penalty area, and when Irankunda picked out Morgan, he made space for himself before firing home. Truly stunning. Shame about the celebration though. Drink it in, Reading fans. At the season's halfway point, the Royals somehow found themselves in second place in the Premier League, just 4 points behind table-topping Liverpool. Could the newly promoted side really remain in the Champions League places? Well, apparently the owners thought so, as they added more than £45 million to their transfer kitty. This meant that Reading had almost £60 million to spend as the January transfer window opened, and they got to work straight away, raiding Belgian side KRC Genk for the much-coveted Konstantinos Karetsas. The Greek attacking midfielder arrived for £15.5 million, making him the club's record signing. But that record did not last for long. They immediately spent just over £30 million on Belgian winger Julian Duranville from Osasuna, who were toiling away in the bottom half of La Liga. This was a real statement of intent, and both players went straight into the Royal starting 11, with Daniel Chirewa and Ben Elliott dropping to the bench. Before the window shut, striker Basil Tuma was allowed to join Plymouth Argyle for £850,000, while defensive midfielder Shea Spencer went to Motor Lublin in Poland for just over £500,000. Back on the pitch, Reading began their FA Cup campaign with a win over Sheffield United in the third round, before they travelled to the CBS Arena to face Coventry in the fourth. Karetsas and Duranville both started, but they could only look on in horror as Coventry struck twice in the opening 25 minutes. Zion Fleming bagged the first before setting up Brandon Thomas Asante for the second. Piers Charles should definitely have done better with that one. Reading were shell-shocked, but managed to pull one back on the stroke of half-time as a move involving both of their new signings ended with Ehibhatiomhan finding the net. And after Jack Rudoni and Liam Kitching both missed presentable chances just after the break, the Royals went straight up the other end and equalised through Karetsas. After that, it was one-way traffic, and substitute Kieran Morgan finally put the Royals ahead in the latter stages. Then another sub, Jay Robinson, finished things off from Irankunda's pass in added time. Goals from Irankunda and Duranville helped Reading to a 2-1 win over Newcastle at the SCL in the next round of the competition. Then, with a place at Wembley at stake, an extra time goal from Duranville gave them another 2-1 win, this time over Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park. Reading had already enjoyed success at Wembley under One Giant Pixel, having beaten Wigan in the final of the Virtue Trophy in 2026. But winning an FA Cup semi-final against Manchester City, now under the stewardship of Eddie Howe, was a different proposition entirely. Reading started well, and Irankunda twice went close but was denied by City goalkeeper Gianluigi Donnarumma on both occasions. Then, with half-time approaching, Karetsas found Duranville down the left, and his low ball across was bundled in by Ehibhatiomhan. Make no mistake, the Royals fully deserve their lead, but you are unlikely to see a scrappier goal. It basically hit the striker and dribbled over the line. That spurred Manchester City into action, but they had to wait until just before the hour mark for their first shot on target. Straight afterwards, Duranville ran into trouble, and Issa Kabore fired in this effort that Charles managed to claw away. City huffed and puffed after that, but Reading kept the ball so well that they could not find a way back. And just look at those scenes at the final whistle. Victory meant that the Royals would be returning to this famous stadium at the end of the season to take on Leeds United in the FA Cup final, but more on that later. While they were making progress in the Cup, Reading also kept winning games in the Premier League. The front three of Duranville, Irankunda and Ehibhatiomhan all scored as they beat Aston Villa 3-0 at the SCL Stadium, and Duranville added another to his tally as they ran out 1-0 winners at home against Brentford. That victory secured a top 4 finish for Reading and gave them Champions League football for the first time in the club's history. But could they catch Liverpool at the top of the table? To do so, they would have to get a result at Anfield, which would be easier said than done given the quality in the Reds lineup. But they got off to the perfect start when Irankunda latched latched onto Jacob Wright's pinpoint pass and swept the ball beyond Georgi Mamadashvili. The hosts went straight up the other end, and when Dijkstra's acrobatic clearance fell to Florian Wirtz, he produced a quite astonishing finish to equalise. Liverpool ramped up the pressure and missed a succession of chances through Alexander Isak and Cody Gakpo, much to the chagrin of boss Arne Slot. And the Royals made them pay as Caretsas picked out Ehibhatiomhan and he cushioned the ball into the bottom corner. There was still time for Isak to miss one more gilt-edged opportunity as Reading held on for what at the time felt like a massive win. Going into the final game of the season, Reading were 3 points behind Liverpool with an inferior goal difference. They knew they would have to beat Ipswich Town at the SCL and hoped that the Reds were defeated at Nottingham Forest to have any hope of lifting that trophy. And the Royals kept their side of the bargain as goals from Irankunda and Elliott gave them a 2-0 win over their opponents from Suffolk. But the lack of celebrations at the final whistle should tell you everything you need to know. Yes, Liverpool had eked out a 1-1 draw at Forest to win the title by a single point. Reading were forced to put their disappointment to one side as they still had to face Leeds United in the FA Cup final. The Royals had never won this famous trophy before, so this was a real chance for them to make history. But it was the Championship side that made the brighter start, and Pereira had to be at his best to make 2 saves in quick succession from Noah Okafor and Al Tanaka. Then came the sucker punch. With half-time looming, Caretsas played it through to Ehibhatiomhan and he ran on before making no mistake with the finish. Leeds did not give up and got back on level terms just before the hour mark as Sean Longstaff pounced on Andre Garcia's mistake. Their fans must have been sensing a momentous upset at that point, but Reading's superior quality soon put paid to those hopes. Irankunda got onto the end of Ehibhatiomhan's exquisite through ball and hit the post before hammering home the rebound to put them ahead once again. Then, with fewer than 10 minutes remaining, substitute Bradley Ibrahim's cute pass allowed Ehibhatiomhan to put the result beyond doubt. As the final whistle blew, Reading's players and fans could celebrate winning yet another trophy, the 4th since One Giant Pixel took over as manager. But this was by far the biggest. Captain Joel Pereira got the party started and brought the curtain down on what had been a truly magnificent season for the Royals. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan was named the Premier League Player of the Year, having picked up the Golden Boot after scoring a total of 27 goals in the top flight. He was also 3rd in the assists table with 10, while Daniel Trerewa was 4th with 9. And Joel Pereira had the 2nd highest number of clean sheets. They were getting used to bus parades in Reading and the future was looking bright for the town's football club. But could they go one better in the league next season and win the title? And how would they get on in Europe? You're not dreaming, Reading Football Club really are in the Champions League. But how will they fare in Europe's biggest club competition? And can they put together another Premier League title challenge? Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals Season 4. Reading enjoyed their best ever campaign in 2027-28. They took the Premier League title race to the very final day, eventually missing out on the trophy by a single point. But their 2nd place finish did mean that they qualified for the Champions League for the first time in their history. They also managed to win their first ever FA Cup as they saw off Leeds United at Wembley. Ahead of the new campaign, One Giant Pixel had 2 options: to continue with the players that had brought him so much success, or gamble on overhauling the squad. Having been handed a transfer kitty of more than £70 million, the gaffer chose to twist, not stick. He immediately spent just under £50 million on bringing in Ethan Nwaneri from Crystal Palace. The young winger would provide competition for Nestori Irankunda down Reading's right-hand side. One Giant Pixel then scoured the market for talented free agents. Right-back Gonzalo Navas and centre-backs Joshua Baka and Michele Conti all arrived in a bid to shore up the Royals' backline. 18-year-old striker Marek Mazurek and 16-year-old defensive midfielder Jurga Kola also came in and were immediately loaned out to Brighton and Espanyol respectively. One Giant Pixel then promoted attacking midfielder Joshua Newton and winger Billy Sutton to the senior squad from the club's youth academy. They were subsequently sent out on loan to Moreirense in Portugal and Alanyaspor in Turkey. All of this activity meant that some players had to be on their way. Fullback Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan and centre-backs Paudie O'Connor, Michael Stickland and Derek Williams were all sold. Attacking midfielder Tyler Saki and wingers Paddy Lane and Daniel Trerewa were also allowed to leave as the Royals clawed back more than £16 million in sales. After all of that, this was the Royals squad that would be facing England and Europe's finest with Conti as captain. As FA Cup holders, Reading's season began with a trip to Wembley to take on Premier League champions champions Liverpool for the Community Shield. This was an early chance for both sides to gain not only some silverware but also a psychological edge over their opponents going into the new campaign. Ousmane Dembele started up front for the champions and he was denied early on before Julian Duranville showed him how it was done to put the Royals ahead. Great finish, dreadful celebration. Then, right on the stroke of half-time, Cody Gakpo found Takefusa Kobu and he fired into the top corner to haul Liverpool level. But Reading would not be denied and Duranville's second put them ahead with quarter of an hour remaining before substitute Ben Elliott finished things off in injury time. So, another win at Wembley and another trophy for the Royals, but those subdued celebrations meant one thing, that they had much bigger fish to fry. And here we go, Reading's first ever match in the Champions League was at the SCL Stadium against Slavia Prague. Those Royals fans must have been in dreamland, but their side almost got a rude awakening early on as Christos Seferis brought the best out of Joel Pereira. That spurred the hosts into action and they proceeded to tear into their opponents as they scored 5 times without reply before the break. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan got 2 of them with Duranville, Konstantinos Karetsas and Nwaneri bagging the others. Things went from bad to worse for the visitors right at the start of the second half when Ehibhatiomhan was chopped down by Igo Ogbu, who was sent off. Ehibhatiomhan went on to complete his hat-trick before substitutes Jay Robinson and Ben Elliott struck late on to make the final score a quite incredible 8-0. The Champions League group stage also saw Reading travel to Turin to take on Italian giants Juventus at the Allianz Stadium. I've said it before and I'll say it again, playing 3 at the back against this Royals side is a recipe for disaster. And so it proved as Ehibhatiomhan's low cross was converted by Duranville in the opening few minutes. After that the Royals created and spurned chance after chance after chance as the hosts struggled to hang on. Then Duranville stole the ball back and found Karetsas, whose pass allowed substitute Jay Robinson to seal victory for the visitors. In the Premier League, Reading were aiming to go one better than the previous season and actually win the title. To do so, they would have to get results against some seriously talented sides. Among them were Arsenal, who arrived at the SCL Stadium brimming with quality and managed by Pep Guardiola. But the Royals showed that they could go toe-to-toe with their opponents early on, as a move Arsene Wenger's Invincibles would have been proud of ended with Ehibhatiomhan firing home. Soon after half-time, the striker turned provider, with Nwaneri getting away from Milos Kerkez and scoring against the club where he had started his career. Arsenal striker Hugo Ekitike held off Andre Garcia and Michele Conti before eventually pulling one back, but it was too little, too late. There is no doubt that playing Manchester City at the Etihad is one of the toughest away days in the Premier League, but this Reading side was really starting to purr. From kick-off, the visitors worked their way upfield and Duranville drilled the ball past Gianluigi Donnarumma to put them ahead. As the Royals piled on the pressure, the Belgian winger then had a shot saved before Nwaneri hit the post with another fierce effort. The pivotal moment came just before half-time. Erling Haaland shot straight at Reading keeper Piers Charles before the away side went right up the other end and doubled their advantage through Ehibhatiomhan. The Royals had yet more chances to extend their lead after the break, but they had to settle for a 2-0 win after what was a monumental performance at the Etihad. The Sky Blues were able to get their revenge on the Royals in the Carabao Cup, however. They won 3-2 at the SCL Stadium in the quarter-finals thanks to a last-minute winner from Tijani Reinders. Despite that defeat, things were looking good for Reading as the season reached its halfway point. They were 5 points clear at the top of the Premier League and well placed to win their first ever top-flight title. They were also top of the Champions League standings after a quite incredible 6 wins from 6 in the competition. Having decided not to make any changes to their squad in the January transfer window, they came up against Paris Saint-Germain in the final match of the group stage. Nestori Irankunda was given a rare start ahead of Nwaneri, but there was nothing he could do as the visitors went ahead through Christos Solis early on. Yep, it definitely went over the line. The Royals winger did make his mark after half an hour, however, collecting a lovely ball over the top from Karetsas and finding the far corner. Then, with half-time approaching, Karetsas blew the roof off the SCL as he put Reading ahead from Ehibhatiomhan's pass. The hosts stepped up a gear after the break and quick-fire goals from Irankunda and Ehibhatiomhan either side of the hour mark put them out of sight. There was still time for substitutes Nwaneri and Jay Robinson to combine and cap off a quite wonderful night for the Reading faithful. At the end of the league phase, the Royals were top of the pile, having remained unbeaten throughout. In the second round of the competition, Carabao scored 3 times over 2 legs as Reading overcame Borussia Dortmund 6-3 on aggregate. That set up a quarter-final tie against Manchester City, with the first leg taking place at the Etihad. And it was Reading who drew first blood as Nwaneri's back heel enabled Ehibhatiomhan to open the scoring midway through the second half. But just minutes later, talismanic midfielder Rodri burst into the box and fired in the equaliser despite the best efforts of Joel Pereira. This meant that the two sides went to the SCL all square. After half an hour, Nwaneri picked out a fabulous pass that allowed Carabao to put Reading ahead on aggregate once again. The Royals looked for all the world like they would be progressing to the semi-finals, but then Manchester City winger Luca Norton entered the fray 10 minutes after half-time. Within moments he was put through and rocketed the ball into the top corner to level things up. Then, having been kept quiet for most of the tie, Erling Haaland produced this turn and finish. For the first time, City had their noses in front. And while the Royals fought bravely to try to get back into the contest, the Sky Blues managed to hold on. Reading's players and fans were understandably distraught at the final whistle, but they could be proud of their efforts in their first ever European campaign. Their Champions League exit meant that they had only one cup competition left to play for, the FA Cup. The Royals were aiming to become the first club to retain the trophy since Arsenal in 2015, and they beat the Gunners as well as Chelsea on their way to the semi-finals, where they faced Newcastle United at Wembley. After 120 goalless minutes, the tie went to penalties, and this miss from Eduardo Guardado ensured that Reading would play Liverpool in the final at the end of the season. But what about the Premier League, I hear you cry? Well, while all that Champions League and FA Cup action was going on, one giant pixel was having to use every single player at his disposal to try to keep the Royals at the top of the table. Against Everton at the Hill Dickinson Stadium, for example, squad players like Ben Elliott, Joachim Kai-Sander, Jeriel Dorset and Bradley Ibrahim were all brought into the starting lineup. And they really made their mark as Elliott fired the visitors ahead at one end before Kai-Sander produced an almighty block to prevent an equaliser at the other. Duranville thought he had scored his side second, but he was flagged for offside, while Ehibhatiomhan saw a shot well saved. With a few minutes remaining, Ehibhatiomhan finally made the game safe, although Dwight McNeil did net a consolation for the hosts deep into added time. With their own title chances having long since disappeared, Everton's close neighbours Liverpool travelled to Berkshire hoping to at least avenge their defeat in the Community Shield. But only some heroics from goalkeeper Georgi Mamadashvili kept them from going behind in the first half at the SCL Stadium. After the break, the visitors' best chance fell to Hanshiro Ishihara, but he could not beat Piers Charles. Then, just minutes after being introduced as a substitute, Ben Elliott found Ehibhatiomhan and he turned away from Nico Schlotterbeck before scoring what would prove to be the winning goal. Having been the hero earlier on, that was a poor attempt at a save from Mamadashvili. No wonder Liverpool boss Arne Slot was so unhappy. Reading's fine form in the league meant that with 6 games remaining, a home win against Manchester United would hand them the title. The Red Devils were fighting for a top 4 spot and a Champions League place themselves, so this was never going to be an easy task. In a largely soporific first 45 minutes, Seni Lomans pulled off a great save to deny Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan. The visitors grew into the contest after half-time, and Piers Charles did well to keep out Benjamin Šeško's snapshot before Ronald Araujo's volley from the resulting corner missed by a whisker. With an hour played and the home fans roaring themselves hoarse, Reading responded as Carabao found Ehibhatiomhan and his shot came back off the post. Just moments later, the pair tried again, and this time Ehibhatiomhan made no mistake to finally break the deadlock. Could the hosts hold on? Of course they could. Cue massive celebrations as Reading sealed the first top-flight title in their history. Captain Michele Conti, in his first season at the club, stepped forward to hold that famous trophy aloft after what had been 10 months of hard work. In the end, Reading finished way ahead of the chasing pack in the Premier League, having lost only once all season. But they could not relax just yet. They had another trophy to fight for. It seemed fitting that the season should end as it had started, with a game against Liverpool at Wembley. Back in August, the two sides had locked horns for the Community Shield. This time, it was for the FA Cup. When the pyrotechnics had finished and the match finally kicked off, Liverpool were given an early scare as a fantastic Reading passing move ended with Nwaneri shooting just wide. 20 minutes after that, Caretsas waited and waited before playing a perfectly weighted pass into the path of Duranville, and he found the net. The Reds were really struggling to create anything, and Ehibhatiomhan almost made it 2-0, but Mamardashvili was there to make the save. Then, with fewer than 10 minutes remaining, the pressure told. Duranville sped away down the left, cut back inside and put it on a plate for substitute Jay Robinson. The Royals saw out the rest of the game with consummate ease to win their second FA Cup just 12 months after they had secured their first. And there was Conte again to do the honours and bring an end to another enormously successful season. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan was Reading's top scorer with 35 in all competitions, while Julian Duranville netted 25 times. Konstantinos Caretsas was top of the tree when it came to assists with 21. Yet again, Duranville was second, this time with 13. Another season, another 2 trophies, and yet another bus parade through the streets of Reading. And while he was celebrating with his players, One Giant Pixel was already planning for the future. Could his side go even further in the Champions League? Could they retain their Premier League title? Could they win 3 FA Cups in a row? 4 seasons after One Giant Pixel became their manager, Reading FC are Premier League champions. Now they are going after European football's biggest prize. But can they win it? Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals Season 5. That's right, Reading dominated the Premier League in 2028-29, winning the title by a colossal 19 points. And they also retained the FA Cup by beating Liverpool at Wembley. With a new season on the horizon, One Giant Pixel was hoping for more domestic success. But he also had another goal, to win the Champions League. Having been handed a transfer kitty of almost £122 million, the boss might have been tempted to spend big to fulfil his dream. But he trusted this squad to do the business and so decided just to make a few tweaks here and there. Goalkeeper Joseph Jenkins and defensive midfielder Jayden Bourne returned from loan spells at Feyenoord and Südtirol respectively. Defensive midfielder Jack Groves was also promoted to the first team squad from Reading's thriving youth academy. He was then sent on loan to Mantova in Italy for 2 years. One Giant Pixel did dip his toe into the transfer market before the season began, bringing in 18-year-old centre-back Peter Vermeulen on a free transfer. With so many talented defenders ahead of him in the squad, however, he was allowed to go on a 2-year loan to Manchester United of all places. And that was the end of the Royals' transfer activity for the summer, or so One Giant Pixel thought. But more on that later. Reading's first match of the new campaign saw them take on Manchester City at Wembley for the Community Shield. The Sky Blues had knocked them out of the Champions League and Carabao Cup in the previous season, so this was always going to be tricky. In a tight game, both sides created chances, but goalkeepers Piers Charles and Gianluigi Donnarumma repelled everything that was thrown at them. Then, with seconds remaining, substitutes Ben Elliott and Jay Robinson combined, and the latter scored what would prove to be the winner. Some people say that the Community Shield doesn't really matter, those celebrations would suggest otherwise. So Reading added yet another trophy to their ever-growing collection, but would they be able to win any more this season? Well, they could not have asked for a much tougher start to the defence of their Premier League title, as they welcomed Pep Guardiola's Liverpool to the SCL Stadium on the opening day. Ethan Nwaneri forced Georgi Mamardashvili into a good save early on, before Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan fired the Royals into a deserved lead right on the stroke of half-time. The visitors' best moment came just after the break when Reading captain Michele Conte's miscued header fell to Alexis McAllister, but he could not beat Piers Charles. After that, Reading passed up a succession of chances, but it did not matter as they kept things tight at the other end and ran out 1-0 winners. You know what I said about the Royals' transfer activity being over for the summer? Well, Jeriel Dorset had other ideas. It emerged that the left-back had gone public with his desire to leave the club. One Giant Pixel had 2 choices: to terminate Dorset's contract or to isolate and sell him. The boss opted for for the former and the board backed him all the way. Given the circumstances of his departure, this social media post was definitely a choice. Anyway, Reading needed a replacement and they went for pacey 22-year-old Mustafa Adam, who arrived from Anderlecht for £33.5 million. This sorry saga was not the ideal preparation for the Royals' opening game in the Champions League, which came against RB Leipzig at the SCL, but it didn't appear to have had any real impact as Unwaneri and Julian Duranville both scored in the opening 45 minutes. The hosts kept up that pressure in the second half and Konstantinos Karatsas made it 3-0 before substitute Elliott wrapped things up in the final few minutes. There was more trouble in store for Reading ahead of their Champions League clash with Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. Late-night fireworks outside their hotel left much of the squad feeling exhausted, going into what was already going to be a difficult encounter. With players like Jude Bellingham, Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. looking fresh and raring to go, the home side were firm favourites for this one. But the expectant crowd was stunned into silence within the opening 5 minutes as Ehibhatiomhan turned his marker and put Reading 1-0 up. Real came roaring back into it after half an hour when Vinny Jr. found Mbappe and, after some fancy footwork, he coolly slotted home the equaliser. The hosts and the visitors had chances to take the lead after that, but in the end, they had to settle for a draw. Given what had happened the night before, this was some result for the Royals. The competition's league phase did not get any easier for Reading as Italian giants Napoli visited the SCL on match day 5. The away side absolutely dominated the first half in Berkshire, racking up chance after chance but failing to find the net. And the Royals made them pay on the hour mark as Karatsas found Ehibhatiomhan and he calmly stroked the ball into the bottom corner. The goal well and truly took the wind out of Napoli's sails and they failed to create a meaningful chance after that as the hosts claimed all 3 points. At the season's halfway mark, Reading were top of the tree in the Champions League and looking odds on to qualify automatically for the next round of the competition. The Premier League title race meanwhile seemed to be all but over with the Royals 18 points clear of the chasing pack. And in the Carabao Cup, Reading had defeated both Manchester clubs as well as Sunderland to set up a semi-final against Middlesbrough. During the January transfer window, One Giant Pixel decided to promote defensive midfielder Joseph Hawkins, centre-back Leon North and winger Kyle Terry from the Royals Youth Academy. The trio was sent out on loan to Saint-Gallen, Levante and Stade Brestois respectively. The board then told the boss that 100% of the remaining transfer budget for this season would be carried over to the next. He had already decided not to make any new signings, so that meant more than £81 million would go into the following campaign's kitty. After that, there was some even better news. At a star-studded ceremony, One Giant Pixel was named Manager of the Year. Back on the pitch, Reading went into their two-legged Carabao Cup semi-final against Middlesbrough as firm favourites, and they more than lived up to that status during the first leg at the SCL Stadium. The hosts were 3 up at half-time thanks to goals from Kieran Morgan, Ehibhatiomhan and Duranville. After the break, Nestori Irankunda and Gonzalo Navas both struck to make the final score 5-0. That result meant that they could rest their stars for the second leg at the Riverside, but they were still far too strong for their opponents. Goals from Ben Elliott and Jay Robinson gave them a 2-0 win on the night and a 7-0 victory on aggregate. Their opponents in the final would be none other than Liverpool, who they had beaten in the Community Shield and FA Cup final the previous year. In the Champions League, meanwhile, the competition's league phase was drawing to a close, and having already faced Real Madrid, Reading went up against Hansi Flick's Barcelona at the SCL in their final game. The hosts got off to the perfect start as Karatsas played it through to Ehibhatiomhan and he rocketed a shot into the top corner. The Royals kept creating chances and only some great goalkeeping stopped them from doubling their advantage before half-time. Then not long after the break, Karatsas finally gave his side some breathing space with this goal. Barcelona had to wait until the final few minutes to register their first shot on target, but Pierce Charles was equal to Alexander Isak's effort. This 2-0 victory meant that Reading finished the league phase at the top of the table. In the next round, Charlie Savage scored in both legs as the Royals hammered Borussia Dortmund 7-0 on aggregate. Ehibhatiomhan then bagged a hat-trick at the Emirates as his side overcame Arsenal 6-3 on aggregate. All of a sudden, Reading were into the Champions League semi-finals for the first time in their history. Their opponents? Barcelona, who would surely be out for revenge after their earlier defeat at the SCL. The Royals did have yet another trophy to play for, of course, the FA Cup. They defeated Derby, Sheffield United, Arsenal and Sunderland on their way to a semi-final against West Ham United at Wembley. An own goal plus strikes from Ehibhatiomhan, Elliott and Irankunda saw them reach the final for the third season in a row. Newcastle United lay in wait. With the business end of the season upon them, Reading was still in 4 competitions. They couldn't win them all. Could they? The first step on their path to glory was the Carabao Cup final against Liverpool at Wembley, and the Royals got off to a flyer as Carabao was brought down by Odilon Kosunu, and the referee had no hesitation in pointing to the spot. Up stepped Ehibhatiomhan and he made no mistake from 12 yards to open the scoring. But Liverpool are made of stern stuff and they were level just before the half-hour mark. Ousmane Dembele got onto the end of Dominic Szoboszlai's dinked pass and thumped a shot into the roof of the net. Ehibhatiomhan had a second goal ruled out with almost an hour played. I have no idea what he's moaning about, he was miles off there. Duranville then saw a shot saved before Malik Fofana almost won it for the Reds in the closing stages, only to be denied by Pierce Charles. And so the final went to extra time. Just 5 minutes in, Charlie Savage found Duranville and he twisted and turned before finally breaking the deadlock. Not long after that, Duranville turned provider, putting in a low cross that Irankunda swept home to send the Reading fans into hysterics. Just look at those celebrations. Liverpool could not respond, and with minutes remaining, substitute Ben Elliott produced a delicious through ball and Irankunda finished things off. The final result may have looked like a comprehensive win, but make no mistake, Reading had been pushed all the way in this one. Still, the Royals fans and players would not have cared one bit, as Michele Conti lifted the cup before showing it off to all and sundry. With one trophy in the bag, Reading had the chance to secure another one almost immediately. In the Premier League, their scintillating form meant that they could retain their title with 8 games remaining. All they had to do was to beat lowly Bournemouth at the SCL Stadium. Those fans did not have to wait too long for something to celebrate, as Ben Elliott found Ehibhatiomhan early on and he produced the coolest of finishes. The Royals were purring and could have added to their tally in the first half, but Ehibhatiomhan and Irankunda both wasted good opportunities. Then with an hour played, a fantastic move featuring Duranville, Savage and Elliott ended with Ehibhatiomhan slamming home his side's second. Bournemouth looked down and out at that point, but they did reduce the arrears when Eli Jr. Krupi produced this wonderful finish. Reading were not to be denied, however, and in the final 10 minutes, Carabao beautiful ball over the top allowed substitute Nwaneri to make the final score 3-1. The Royals had now won back-to-back Premier League titles, but they could not celebrate too hard. Up next was the Champions League semi-final against Barcelona, with the first leg in Spain. Both sides squandered good chances in the first half an hour or so before Carabao found Nwaneri, and his confident finish put the visitors ahead. Pierce Charles did brilliantly to keep out this Fermin Lopez effort, and then 10 minutes from time, substitute Jay Robinson finished off a move involving Carabao and Savage to seal a 2-0 win. Back at the SCL Stadium, the atmosphere was electric as these two heavyweights prepared for another titanic tussle. Last-ditch tackles at both ends of the pitch kept the game goalless in a frantic opening half-hour. Ehibhatiomhan then put Carabao through, and the attacking midfielder made no mistake to seemingly end the tie as a contest. And although Lamine Yamal grabbed a consolation, it was far too little, far too late. The final whistle confirmed that Reading had reached their first ever Champions League final. Only Manchester City now lay between them and old Big Ears. Before that, there was the small matter of an FA Cup final against Newcastle United at Wembley. The Royals were favourites, having won this competition in each of the previous 2 seasons. But Newcastle came flying out of the blocks, and Morgan Gibbs-White's cross was volleyed home by Eduardo Guardado with 10 minutes played. The fans went wild up in the northeast, and Magpies goalkeeper Luis Malagon soon had them celebrating again with saves from Carabao and Savage. But he could not do anything about this one, as Duranville found Ehibhatiomhan, and the striker's toe poke dribbled over the line to make it 1-1. It looked for all the world as though Carabao would complete Reading's comeback when he went through, but somehow he put this chance wide. To the Royal chagrin, Newcastle went right up the other end, and Nick Voltemada converted Guardado's low ball across to send the Toon Army into raptures. Then, with Reading pouring forward in an attempt to find another equaliser, the pair combined again in added time to seal a famous victory. As the Royals players watched their opponents go up to lift the cup, there was
was one question on everybody's lips. With the Champions League final against Manchester City just around the corner, would this result destroy Reading's confidence, or would it make them even more determined? They did not have to wait too long to find out. Schalke's Veltins Arena was the venue for European club football's showpiece occasion, and those watching in the stands and at home were treated to an absolute classic. Manchester City were by far the better team in the opening stages, creating chances almost at will. It was therefore no surprise when Sven Nijpan put them ahead before Tom Bischoff doubled their advantage in added time at the end of the first half. The Royals looked dead and buried at that point, but Carezas immediately found the net to reduce the deficit before the break. Unbelievably, Carezas struck again minutes into the second half before Nwaneri latched onto Ehibhatiomhan's wonderful through ball to put his side 3-2 up on the hour mark. Then, with time running out and Reading on the verge of history, Michele Conti failed to close down Erling Haaland and the Norwegian striker sent the game to extra time. Manchester City struck first in the additional period as Bischoff found space on the edge of the Royals box and cracked a shot into the top corner. One giant pixel immediately replaced Carezas with Ben Elliott, and it turned out to be an inspired change as the substitute made it 4-4 with fewer than 10 minutes remaining. And so, after a breathless 120 minutes, this topsy-turvy contest went to penalties. Misses from Luca Norton and Omar Marmoush gave Charlie Savage the chance to win it, but his effort was saved. Eder Militao then converted his spot kick, piling the pressure on Reading fullback Gonzalo Navas. But he held his nerve to seal the Royals' first ever Champions League triumph and bring down the curtain on one of the greatest finals of all time. What a moment this was for captain Michele Conti and his teammates. And don't forget the fans who had seen their club go from treading water in League One to becoming kings of Europe in just 5 seasons. After all of that, this was the final Premier League table, with Reading having won by a gargantuan 27 points. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan was the Royals' standout performer with 54 goals and 12 assists in all competitions. He was the top scorer in the League, Champions League and FA Cup, and it came as no surprise that he was named the Premier League Player of the Season. At last, a long and fruitful campaign was over, and Reading organised yet another bus parade to show off the 3 trophies they had won. But could they possibly go one better and secure an unprecedented quadruple in the future?
Reading FC have been crowned Kings of Europe, and now they're looking to become the first English club to complete the quadruple. Can they do it? Let's find out. Welcome to Reviving the Royals Season 6. The 2029-30 season saw Reading win one of the greatest Champions League finals of all time. They also retained their Premier League title and lifted the Carabao Cup to secure a famous treble. With a new campaign on the horizon, Royals boss One Giant Pixel had his heart set on going one better and winning an unprecedented quadruple. So he decided to make a few changes to a squad that had already seen defensive midfielder Lewis Wing retire and goalkeeper Joel Pereira become a free agent after his contract expired. Fortunately, the gaffer had a rather sizable transfer kitty at his disposal. The first player through the door at the SCL Stadium was imposing Belgian goalkeeper Noah Mercier, who joined from Manchester United for almost £56 million. And One Giant Pixel pulled off a major coup by convincing French defensive midfielder Yann Courbet to swap Real Madrid for Reading in a deal worth just under £100 million. Attacking midfielder Alia Touré then joined on a free transfer, as did winger Abdul Majid Abubakar. The boss subsequently decided to cut short central defender Peter Vermeulen's loan at Manchester United and brought him back into the fold. Defensive midfielder Jurgen Kohler, winger Billy Sutton, attacking midfielder Joshua Newton and striker Marek Mazurek also returned, having each spent 2 years out on loan. These arrivals meant that some players had to leave. Defensive midfielder Bradley Ibrahim was sold to Monza for £3 million, while Excelsior Rotterdam spent £5 million on winger Isaac Brusberg. Attacking midfielder Kieran Morgan went to West Ham United for £18.5 million, and centre-back Hayden Matthews was sold to Kaiserslautern for the same price. Last but not least, academy prospects Jack Faulkner, Nathan Brown and Lee Baxter were all promoted to the senior squad. They were sent on loan to Spezia, Almeria and Bodo Glimt respectively. After all of that, Reading's first 11 was looking incredibly strong as they prepared to take on Newcastle Newcastle for the Community Shield at Wembley. The Toon Army had beaten the Royals in the previous season's FA Cup final, so One Giant Pixel's men were out for revenge. And after Eduardo Guardado had brought the best out of Mercier, they went straight up the other end and Julien Duranville pounced to put them ahead. Newcastle were level just after the hour mark when Nick Voltemada was given far too much time and space and he fired home. Both sides created chances after that, but it was Reading who emerged on top as a slick one-touch passing move ended with Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan finding the net. Even the manager sprinted down the touchline to get involved in the celebrations after that one. Reading's players and fans were delighted at the final whistle and captain Michele Conti was once again on hand to lift the trophy. Just days later, the Royals had the chance to add another piece of silverware to their collection when they faced Europa League holders Roma for the UEFA Super Cup. Ehibhatiomhan picked up where he had left off against Newcastle to put his side 1-0 up before Konstantinos Karetsas doubled their advantage on the stroke of half-time. Ehibhatiomhan went on to complete his hat-trick with two well-taken finishes to seemingly wrap up a convincing win. But the Royals fell apart in the final 15 minutes, with Matthias Soulé, Manu Kone and Petro Kostyuk all scoring as Roma threatened to mount an incredible comeback. In the end, however, Reading managed to hold on and add to their already bulging trophy cabinet. The campaign to defend their Premier League title began with a trip to West London to face Fulham at Craven Cottage. One Giant Pixel rested his stars after their Super Cup exploits, and this move immediately backfired, as Kevin found Eric Koizek and he put the hosts 1-up with a thumping finish. The Royals kept probing for an opening, and when Jacob Wright found Billy Sutton, the young winger bamboozled his marker before netting the equaliser. Then, just minutes before half-time, Sutton got onto the end of Joshua Newton's through ball and gave his side the lead. There were opportunities at either end after the break, but the visitors did just about enough to leave the capital with all 3 points. One Giant Pixel rewarded Billy Sutton with a place in the starting lineup as Reading took on Como at the SCL Stadium on match day 1 of the Champions League. And he repaid the manager's faith within quarter of an hour as he set up Ehibhatiomhan for the game's opening goal. Soon afterwards, Nestori Irankunda was put through by Ehibhatiomhan and he sprinted away from the chasing defenders before providing an emphatic finish. And it was 3-0 just before half-time as a corner found its way to Ehibhatiomhan, whose shot was bundled into his own net by Julen Aguirrezabala. Jeremy Bale did pull a goal back for the visitors after the break, but this really was a comfortable win for the Royals in the end. Then, disaster. Right before Reading's Champions League clash with Real Madrid, it emerged that Pierce Charles had been a bit of a naughty boy. One Giant Pixel was ruthless, immediately deciding to terminate the goalkeeper's contract, and the club's board gave the boss their full support. After all of that, one might have forgiven the Royals players for starting slowly against Los Blancos at the Bernabeu, but they came storming out of the blocks and Karetsas slid home the opener with fewer than 15 minutes on the clock. Reading were positively purring, and when Ethan Nwaneri found Ehibhatiomhan, he turned away from his marker before slamming an unstoppable shot beyond the keeper. Kylian Mbappe dragged Real Madrid back into the contest before the break, but this late goal from Julien Duranville put paid to any hopes of a comeback. What a win this was for the visitors. At the season's halfway point, Reading were in second place in the Champions League table and looking pretty much certain to qualify automatically for the next round. And nobody could keep up with them in the Premier League. Just 19 games into the season, they already had one hand on the trophy. In the Carabao Cup, meanwhile, the Royals had defeated Liverpool, Burnley and Aston Villa to set up a two-legged semi-final against Manchester City. They had reason to celebrate off the pitch too, as One Giant Pixel was named Manager of the Year yet again. Reading went into the first leg of their Carabao Cup semi-final having decided to make no changes to their squad during the January transfer window. The Etihad was looking resplendent and the visitors served up a performance to match those pyrotechnics. Ehibhatiomhan got the ball rolling early on as he gleefully accepted Nwaneri's pass and produced a fine turn and finish. But City hit back immediately as Claudio Echeverri hammered home the equaliser from Erling Haaland's pass. That was as good as it got for the hosts. With almost half an hour played, Karetsas found Gonzalo Navas with a delightful pass and he set up Ehibhatiomhan for his second goal of the game. And the visitors pulled away in the second half as Julien Duranville fired past Gianluigi Donnarumma before substitute Marek Mazurek made it 4-1. That win meant that One Giant Pixel could rest a few of his starters for the second leg of the SCL. Both sides hit the woodwork as they played out a relatively dull 0-0 draw to ensure that Reading reached the final where they would play Nottingham Forest. Back in the Champions League, the final match of the league phase saw the Royals welcome Turkish giants Galatasaray to the SCL Stadium. The hosts took a little while to get going, but then Ehibhatiomhan burst through and held off a defender before finding the far corner. Mercier was called upon to save his side on a couple
of occasions after half-time, but then Duranville found Andre Garcia marauding forward and the fullback produced an unstoppable finish to put the game to bed. The win meant that Reading finished the league phase in second place behind Marseille. In the next round, Carabao scored twice at the San Mamés as they overcame Athletic Bilbao 5-1 on aggregate, and they defeated Manchester City 2-1 on aggregate in the quarter-finals with Andre Garcia among the scorers. They would play Inter Milan in the semis. While all of this was going on, the Royals were also sweeping aside Plymouth Argyle, West Ham, Aston Villa and Tottenham in the FA Cup to set up a semi-final against Chelsea. Yet again, Reading were still in 4 competitions going into the business end of the season. Up next was the Carabao Cup final against Nottingham Forest on a quite beautiful evening at Wembley. Within 3 minutes, Ehibhatiomhan got onto the end of a through ball from Caretsas and beat Konstantinos Tsolakis from an unbelievably tight angle. Forest was shell-shocked and the striker doubled the Royals' lead not long afterwards before Ethan Nwaneri made it 3-0. Before the break, there was still time for Nwaneri to score his second goal of the game and for Amari Hutchinson to pull one back for Forest. Any hopes of a miraculous fight back were extinguished just after half-time as Ehibhatiomhan completed his hat-trick. Weston McKennie did manage to get another one for Forest, but the Royals shut up shop after that and were soon celebrating what had turned out to be a bit of a thrashing. All that was left was for captain Michele Conti to step forward and lift the cup before the players ran over to share their joy with the fans. The Royals had an opportunity to win another trophy when they faced Chelsea at Stamford Bridge just a few days later. They went into the game knowing that if they matched or bettered Arsenal's result against bottom club Swansea City, they would be Premier League champions again. And they got off to the perfect start as, you guessed it, Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan turned his marker inside out before finishing with aplomb. He was at it again 10 minutes before half-time, expertly taking down Julian Duranville's lofted pass and finding the bottom corner. The hosts did create a few opportunities after the break, but either put them wide or found Royals goalkeeper Noah Mercier in fine form. At the final whistle, the Reading fans got the party started in the away end while the players gathered together on the pitch to celebrate the result of months of hard work. For some unknown reason, they had to wait until after their next league game to actually get their hands on the Premier League trophy. Lord knows what that was all about. Anyway, Reading was suddenly halfway to the quadruple and the big games just kept on coming. They had to play Chelsea again in the semi-final of the FA Cup at a wet and windy Wembley. And with just 5 minutes on the clock, Duranville got onto the end of Corbet's pinpoint pass and he was never going to miss that. With half-time approaching, Nwaneri then went on a run from within his own half. Chelsea's defenders were seemingly unwilling to close him down, so he just kept on going before eventually tucking a low finish into the net. The Royals' opponents were desperately poor going forward. Anytime they got anywhere near the goal, their feeble attempts were comfortably repelled. And so it was that Reading advanced to the final, where they would face Brighton and Hove Albion. But before that, it was time to turn their attention to the Champions League once again. There was a febrile atmosphere inside the SCL as the Royals welcomed Inter Milan for the first leg of their semi-final. And the fans went bonkers as straight from kick-off the ball was worked to Duranville and he made it 1-0. Reading fullback Gonçalo Navas then produced a quite sensational block at the other end before Duranville struck again on the stroke of half-time. And after Mercier pulled off this fine save, the Royals put together a flowing move that ended with Ehibhatiomhan firing home his side's third. Tie over? Not quite. The visitors gave themselves hope late on as Fran Benitez found the bottom corner and the striker almost got another shortly after that. But Mercier made the stop and the game ended 3-1. Ahead of the second leg at the San Siro, there was real belief among the Inter fans that they could come back and win this tie. But those hopes were soon dashed as Ethan Nwaneri skipped away from his marker and slammed a shot into the far corner. The Royals fans back at home enjoyed that one. The home side now needed 3 goals to take the tie to extra time, but on the rare occasion that they did threaten, Mercier was equal to everything that was thrown at him. This was an incredibly professional display from the visitors, and the final whistle confirmed their place in another Champions League final. This time around, they would be playing Bayer Leverkusen. Reading were now just 2 games away from realising their dream of becoming the first English club to win the quadruple. The first was the FA Cup final against Brighton at Wembley. The Royals had been defeated by Newcastle in the previous year's final, and they were determined
determined to right that wrong. They started like a train. Brighton had not even touched the ball when Navas's lofted pass was headed across by Nwaneri, and Ehibhatiomhan was there to put his side ahead. Brighton refused to lie down and created a couple of half chances before Arda Güler's cross was headed home quite wonderfully by Jorginho Rutter 5 minutes before the break. Then after Folarin Balogun passed up this opportunity just moments after the interval, Reading went straight up the other end and Ehibhatiomhan restored their lead. Mercier produced a magnificent save to keep out this Rutter effort before Navas released Ehibhatiomhan, and a player of his calibre was never going to pass up that chance. The goal meant that the striker had scored a hat-trick in the finals of the FA Cup and Carabao Cup this season. Brighton could not respond as the Royals completed a domestic treble, much to the delight of the players as well as the fans watching inside the stadium and at home. And what a way to exercise the demons of that final against Newcastle. But there was no time to relax. They had to put their bodies through one last gruelling encounter if they were going to win the quadruple. Atletico Madrid's Estadio Metropolitano was the venue for this year's Champions League final. A wonderful stadium for a wonderful occasion. Only Oliver Glasner's Bayer Leverkusen stood between Reading and sporting immortality, and the German side seemed desperate to stop the Royals from making history early on as they poured forward, creating chances almost at will. On the half-hour mark, Lucas Bergvall won the ball from Michele Conti and set up Esteval for the opener. It was the very least they deserved. Leverkusen were not only excellent going forward, but they were also strong at the back, and Reading were really struggling to break them down. Then on the stroke of half-time, they created two chances out of nowhere, with goalkeeper Anatoly Trubin denying Karetsas and Joshua Bakker. After the second save and with the Leverkusen fans bouncing, Charlie Savage's corner was nodded on and Conti produced this outrageous overhead kick to equalise. We've got to look at that one again. Stunning, simply stunning. The second half was pretty much the same as the first, with Leverkusen creating chances and Reading being suffocated when they ventured forward. But this time the German side could not make their pressure count. And when the Royals broke forward with only a couple of minutes remaining, well, this happened. Cue utter bedlam in Spain and back in Berkshire. The final whistle sparked joyous scenes as the full magnitude of Reading's achievements sank in. For the first time ever, an English club had won the Champions League, Premier League, FA Cup and League Cup in the same season. And having scored that ridiculous bicycle kick to get his side back into a final they arguably deserved to lose, it was fitting that Michele Conti was the first to get his hands on old Big Ears. This was the final Premier League table, with the Royals breaking the 100-point barrier and even going the whole season unbeaten. Kelvin Ehibhatiomhan was once again Reading's top performer with 43 goals and 13 assists in 51 games, although his teammates also played their part over the course of the campaign. Of course, there had to be a bus parade so that Reading's fans could celebrate their football club's momentous achievement. And after 6 seasons, this seems to be the right time to bring this series of videos to an end. After all, under one giant pixel, the Royals had been well and truly revived. Thank you for watching, and if you have enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like or even subscribe to the channel. Goodbye for now.